stand up.
Why?
Stand up now.
What is the basis?
You match the description of a suspect.
Description from what incident?
Stand up.
I'm asking for the legal basis.
Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
I'm a federal prosecutor. I do not consent to detention without lawful cause.
Quit tensing up.
What happens when patrol officers force a public arrest before doing the basic checks that any competent officer should do first? A downtown lunch turned into a handcuff scene in front of a full restaurant. When local officers decided a black man at a corner table matched whatever story they had in their heads. What they didn't know was simple. The man they were grabbing was a federal prosecutor. He knew the law, he knew procedure, and he knew in real time that they were skipping steps they had no business skipping. Before we get into it, comment where you're watching from. And if you like stories about rights, misconduct, and real accountability, like the video and subscribe. Malcolm Reed was 41, federal prosecutor, quiet guy, controlled. Worked a few blocks from the federal courthouse and used that restaurant a lot because it was close, fast, and usually full of courthouse people. That afternoon, he was halfway through lunch reviewing a file when two patrol officers walked in and went straight toward him, not toward the bar, not toward the host stand, not scanning the room, straight to his table. Officer Kessler took the lead. Officer Holloway stayed half a step back and to the side. That kind of positioning tells you a lot. They weren't there to ask questions and sort things out. They had already decided he was their guy. Kessler told Malcolm to stand up. Malcolm looked at him and asked why. Kessler didn't answer. He repeated the order. Malcolm stayed calm. He asked what the basis was for the stop. Same tone, no attitude, no sudden movement. Still no real answer. Kessler then said, Malcolm matched the description of a suspect from a nearby incident. That was vague from the start. No details, no explanation, no effort to narrow anything down. Malcolm told them who he was, federal prosecutor. He also asked them to verify it. They didn't. No call to dispatch, no confirmation through courthouse security, no check with restaurant staff, nothing. That's the part that matters, because this story didn't go bad because officers lacked options. It went bad because they ignored them. The restaurant manager was close enough to hear what was happening. She knew Malcolm had been sitting there eating. Other customers were watching now too. Some recognized him from the courthouse area. None of that slowed Kessler down. Malcolm stood up, slowly, hands visible. He knew better than to make this physical. He asked again what crime they believed he had committed. Kessler didn't answer that cleanly either. He switched from vague suspicion to command language. Turn around, hands behind your back. That told Malcolm everything. This officer wasn't building facts. He was defending his own authority. Holloway moved in tighter on Malcolm's side. Same pattern you see all the time. One officer drives the pressure. The second officer closes space and helps make resistance look impossible. Malcolm said he did not consent to detention without lawful cause. Then Kessler cuffed him in the middle of the restaurant. That's how public it was. Tables still there. Food still there. File still open. Full dining room watching. And this is where the officers made another bad mistake. They did it in front of a room full of witnesses with phones. Some people started recording right away. The manager moved toward the host stand and told staff to preserve the security footage. A couple of people near the windows got clear video of Malcolm being walked out in cuffs. Malcolm didn't fight them, didn't raise his voice, didn't try to win the argument there. That wasn't weakness. That was discipline. He already knew the sidewalk wasn't where this would be decided. Outside, the officers kept pushing instead of fixing the problem. They had his name. They had his job title. They had a public location surrounded by easy ways to verify who he was. They still didn't stop. That's where this turned from a bad detention into a serious misconduct case. Once they got Malcolm outside, the officers had several easy ways to check who they were dealing with. They used none of them. Kessler put him in the back of the patrol car. Malcolm was cuffed, calm, and still telling them the same thing. He worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office. His identity could be confirmed in minutes. Kessler didn't verify that. He shifted his wording instead. Inside the restaurant, Malcolm supposedly matched a description. On the sidewalk, that turned into a reported nearby incident. Same detention. New explanation. That kind of change causes problems fast, especially once video gets reviewed. Malcolm asked what crime he was being detained for. He didn't get a clear answer. He asked for a supervisor. That was the smart move. A few minutes later, Sergeant Porter arrived. This was the first real chance to shut the whole thing down before it got worse. Porter could have checked the name, had dispatch confirm employment, and ended it on the spot. He didn't start there. First, he listened to Kessler. That gave Kessler control over the first version of the record. According to Kessler, Malcolm was uncooperative and refused to identify himself. The problem was simple. People inside the restaurant had just watched Malcolm do the opposite. Porter then went to the patrol car and asked Malcolm for his name. Malcolm gave it. He repeated his job title. He told Porter exactly where to verify it. Porter now had enough to pause the detention and confirm the facts. Instead, he treated the situation like it still needed more officer-side handling. That was another bad decision. Back at the restaurant, Malcolm's identification was still with his jacket near the table. Kessler went inside to get it. Staff tried to explain that Malcolm had been seated there eating and reviewing paperwork before the officers came in. The manager made that clear. Kessler didn't seem interested. He took the jacket, found the wallet, and checked the ID outside. Everything matched. Name matched, face matched, federal credentials matched. At that point, the stop should have been over without delay. There was nothing left to sort out. They had the man's identity in hand, and it supported exactly what he'd been telling them from the beginning. Even then, they hesitated. Kessler handed the ID to Porter. The two of them talked beside the patrol car. Not long. Just long enough to show that neither wanted to be the one admitting this had gone too far. That's what made the next step look even worse. They finally removed the cuffs and told Malcolm he was free to go. No real explanation, no direct apology, no acknowledgement that they had publicly detained and handcuffed a federal prosecutor during lunch without doing the obvious checks first. Malcolm understood right there what kind of case this was becoming. There were restaurant witnesses, security cameras, phone recordings, officer statements, a supervisor on scene. And there was already a gap between what happened and what the officers were going to claim happened. That gap is where cities lose money. Malcolm knew this was the part that mattered most. The arrest was bad, but the real fight was always going to be about the record. If he moved slowly, the officers would get time to clean up their version, soften the language, and make the whole thing sound like a harmless misunderstanding. So he started working the case the same day. He spoke to the restaurant manager before dinner service changed over. She told him she had seen the officers come straight to his table and that she was saving the security footage from inside the dining room and the front entrance. He got the names and numbers of two customers who had recorded the arrest on their phones. By that evening, he had witness contact, restaurant video, phone video, and his own written notes on exactly what happened and in what order. The next morning, he sent preservation notices to the police department and the city. He wanted everything locked down before anybody could claim something was lost or overwritten. Bodycam footage, dash cam footage, radio traffic, dispatch records, supervisor notes, incident reports, any camera pointed at that block. He knew how these cases work. The first paper trail usually tells you more than the public statement ever will. Once the reports came in, the officer's problem was obvious. Kessler wrote that Malcolm had been evasive and uncooperative. That version did not survive contact with the video. The restaurant footage showed Malcolm sitting at his table, speaking calmly, asking why he was being detained, identifying himself, and telling them to verify who he was. That is not evasive conduct. That is a person handing officers an easy off-ramp and watching them refuse to take it. Holloway's report was less aggressive, but it still leaned the same way. He tried to make the encounter sound uncertain and tense, as if the officers were dealing with some unclear situation that forced quick decisions. The recordings did not support that either. Malcolm was not yelling. He was not moving around. He was not resisting. The tension came from the officers deciding early that they were going to control the scene first and sort the facts out later. Porter's memo caused another problem for the city. He framed the detention as a field decision made under limited information. That might have sounded reasonable if this had happened in the dark on an empty street with no witnesses and no way to check anything quickly. But that was not this case. This happened at lunch inside a busy restaurant, a few blocks from the courthouse, with staff, customers, identification nearby, and several easy ways to verify Malcolm's identity once he told them who he was. The information was not limited by the environment. It was limited by the officer's choices. Malcolm then hired Naomi Ellis, a civil rights lawyer who had handled police misconduct cases against cities before. She reviewed the footage, read the reports, and understood right away what kind of case this was becoming. This was not only a wrongful detention case, it was also a retaliation case. The officers got more aggressive after Malcolm questioned their legal basis and told them to verify his identity. That detail changed everything because it made the detention look less like confusion and more like punishment for not submitting fast enough. Naomi started building the case around sequence, not emotion. That was smart. Juries follow sequence. A man was eating lunch. Officers walked straight to his table. They gave no clear legal basis. He identified himself as a federal prosecutor. He told them to verify it. They did not. They handcuffed him in public. A supervisor arrived and still did not shut it down immediately. After that, reports were written that did not match the video. That is the kind of structure that hurts a city badly in court because it is easy to understand and hard to explain away. Then discovery made it worse. Kessler had prior complaints, not movie stuff, not some dramatic hidden file full of scandal. The kind of pattern that cities always regret ignoring later. Complaints about escalation during stops, complaints about aggressive tone, complaints that he stretched weak situations into detentions, complaints about reports that seemed to clean up rough encounters after the fact. Most of those complaints had gone nowhere. A talk with a supervisor, some extra instruction, no serious discipline. That gave Naomi exactly what she needed to argue that the city had warning signs and chose to treat them as minor problems, until one of those problems turned into a major case in public. Porter showed up in earlier reviews involving Kessler. That mattered too. It meant the case no longer rested only on one patrol officer making a bad decision. It now involved supervision. That is where settlement value starts climbing, because juries punish cities much harder when the misconduct looks tolerated instead of isolated. The Bodycam audio then gave Naomi the line that broke the city's defense. At one point, after Malcolm had already identified himself and asked them to verify it, Kessler made a comment that showed where his head really was. He said Malcolm needed to learn he could not talk to officers like he was above the law. That line was deadly, because now the city could not convincingly argue this was just a fast mistake. That comment made it look personal. It made it sound like Kessler stopped trying to investigate and started trying to teach Malcolm a lesson for speaking like someone who knew his rights. Naomi did not need to dramatize that line. She just had to place it in context and let it do the damage on its own. Once local media got the story, the public understood it immediately. A federal prosecutor had been handcuffed at lunch. The officers did not verify his identity, even after he told them who he was. A supervisor arrived and still failed to end it quickly. Then the paperwork did not match the recordings. That is all people needed to hear. Internal Affairs opened an investigation, but by then the department was behind the facts, not ahead of them. The evidence was already outside the building. Witness videos were circulating. The restaurant had preserved footage. The city's lawyers were now reading reports that were harder to defend every time they were compared against video. That was the point when this stopped being a public relations problem and became a money problem. The city knew it had exposure, serious exposure. Not because Malcolm was a federal prosecutor, but because the evidence was clean and the officers had made the same mistake again and again. They skipped verification. They escalated in public. They changed their explanation. Then they wrote reports that did not line up with what the cameras showed. That is how a misconduct case starts getting expensive long before anyone steps into a courtroom. By the time depositions started, the city already knew it had a bad case. The footage was bad. The reports were bad. The supervisor's decisions were bad. And the worst part for the city was that none of it looked complicated. This was not a messy case with unclear facts. It was simple. Malcolm told them who he was. He told them to verify it. They did not do it before cuffing him. Then they tried to explain it afterward with paperwork that did not match the recordings. That is how cities lose control of a case. Naomi Ellis kept the pressure exactly where it needed to be. She did not let the city turn it into a debate about officer stress or fast decision-making. She kept bringing it back to the same point. The officers had time, they had options, they had witnesses, they had identification nearby, they had a supervisor. They had every chance to stop and verify. They chose not to. In Kessler's deposition, that became obvious fast. He was forced to explain why he never verified Malcolm's federal employment before handcuffing him. He was forced to explain why his reason for the detention changed. He was forced to explain why restaurant staff saying Malcolm had already been seated there did not slow him down. He did not have good answers. He kept circling back to officer judgment and scene control. That might sound decent on paper, but it falls apart when the video shows a calm man at lunch and an officer getting more aggressive because he does not like being questioned. Holloway did not help the defense either. He tried to make himself look secondary, like he was just backing his partner on a fast-moving call. That argument only goes so far. He still helped put Malcolm in the car. He still did not stop the detention. He still signed on to a version of events that did not match the evidence. Then Porter sat for deposition, and that was another hit. The city needed him to look like the adult in the room. The supervisor who arrived, assessed the facts, and made a reasonable call. Instead, he looked passive. He admitted he had enough information to start verifying Malcolm's identity quickly. He admitted he did not do that before allowing the detention to continue. He admitted that once the identification came back clean, Malcolm should have been released immediately. That answer hurt because it told the jury exactly where the department failed at the supervisory level. After that, the settlement talks got serious. The city tried to keep the number down early. Malcolm did not bite. Naomi did not let them frame this as a short detention with limited damage. She built the damages the right way. Public humiliation in a crowded restaurant, handcuffing without proper basis, loss of professional standing in front of courthouse staff and members of the public, emotional distress, reputational harm, constitutional violation, pattern evidence, supervisory failure, prior complaints ignored. That is how you move a case out of nuisance value territory and into real money. The city also had another problem. Malcolm was a very strong plaintiff, calm, precise, credible, professionally accomplished, impossible to paint as unstable or reckless. If that case went to a jury, he would be extremely hard to attack and very easy to believe. That changes settlement math fast. Once the judge denied key parts of the city's defense motion and allowed the misconduct pattern evidence to stay in play, the number jumped. At that point, the city was no longer just trying to settle a claim. It was trying to avoid a public trial where every bad decision would be replayed in order. That is when the city agreed to pay $20 million. Not 2, not 5, 20. That number was not just about Malcolm. It was the price of the arrest, the paperwork, the contradictions, the prior warnings, and the supervision failure all stacked together. Then came the fallout inside the department. Kessler was fired. His certification was challenged. He was referred for review over false statements tied to his report and the gap between his report and the video evidence. His career in law enforcement was effectively finished. Holloway resigned before the department completed termination proceedings. He saw where it was going and got out before the final decision hit his file. But that did not save his name. Porter was demoted. The department could not leave a supervisor in place after a case this public showed he had a chance to stop the damage and didn't do it. The department itself had to make changes too. New detention verification rules, required supervisory review and identity dispute stops, stronger report auditing when Bodycam footage exists, more training on retaliatory escalation and constitutional detention limits. The city did not make those changes because it suddenly found wisdom. It made them because $20 million forced the lesson. Malcolm did not do a victory tour. He did not need to. The settlement already said enough. What happened to him was not a misunderstanding. It was not officers being extra careful. It was misconduct, plain and simple. Patrol officers skipped basic verification, turned a lunge into a public arrest, and then tried to write their way out of it. The evidence would not let them. That is the real point of the story. A badge gives authority. It does not erase limits. The moment an officer starts treating basic questions like disrespect, the job stops being law enforcement and turns into ego management. That is when cases explode. That is when cities pay. And that is when careers end. What would you have done in Malcolm's place? Have you ever seen officers get more aggressive the moment somebody calmly asks for the legal basis? Put it in the comments. Share the story with somebody who thinks these cases are always just misunderstandings. And subscribe if you want more real stories about misconduct, accountability, and what happens when the record does not match the truth.
Why are you using this gate?
Because that's what the order said. The verification number is on the page.
I'm asking you, not the paper.
Then call the listed Navy liaison and confirm it.
I think there's a problem with these papers.
Then verify them.
Shut up and turn around.
What happens when a local port officer decides his ego matters more than federal law? This is the story of the moment. A port officer made the career-ending mistake of detaining a high-ranking black naval commander traveling on active duty orders. He ignored the rank, ignored the protocol, and walked straight into a disaster he created himself. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about abuse of authority, accountability, and people who know exactly where they stand, like the video and subscribe. This started at a secured port gate on the East Coast during the morning operations rush. Trucks were lining up, workers were moving, scanners were active, and everybody at that gate had a lane and a process. Commander Julian Cross came through the military access lane in a government vehicle with active orders, military identification, and transfer paperwork ready before the officer even reached the door. He didn't improvise anything. He didn't try to talk his way through. He came in exactly the way he was supposed to. Officer Trevor Pike walked up already acting like he had a problem with what he was looking at. Not cautious, not professional, irritated. And that was the first issue. He didn't start with the normal verification routine. He didn't take the paperwork and run the check. He started by questioning why Cross was there at all. That matters. A trained officer at a controlled gate checks documents first. Pike did the opposite. He treated the commander like he was already lying. Cross identified himself, gave his rank, and handed over the orders. The paperwork clearly showed active duty movement tied to the port. The contact number for confirmation was on the page. The ID matched, the vehicle matched. The lane matched. None of that changed Pike's tone. Instead of verifying the documents, he started pressing Cross with side questions. He wanted to know why he was alone, why he was using that gate, why he was driving that vehicle. The answers were already in the paperwork sitting in his hand, but by then this wasn't really about information. Pike had already moved into that mindset some officers get when they think backing off makes them look weak. Cross stayed calm and answered him anyway. He explained he was under active duty orders and told Pike he could call the listed Navy liaison and confirm everything in a minute or two. That was the easy exit. That was the professional exit. Pike ignored it. He handed the paperwork back without completing the check and told Cross to step out of the vehicle. That's when the whole thing turned. Cross got out. Slowly. Hands visible. No attitude. No sudden movement. He kept it tight because he understood exactly what kind of situation this had become. He had been in command long enough to know that once a local officer starts performing authority instead of using it properly, the risk goes up fast. So he kept his voice level and repeated the same point. Active duty status, valid orders, federal movement, verification available right now. Pike kept cutting him off. He moved closer, started talking louder. Told Cross that rank didn't mean anything at his gate until he said it did. That line told everybody nearby what kind of officer he was. He wasn't confused. He wasn't trying to secure the checkpoint. He was trying to win a face-to-face power contest with a man he had decided not to respect. And yes, race was already sitting in the middle of it, because Pike had every clean reason in the world to verify those papers and move on. But he kept choosing confrontation instead. He looked at a black man in command, holding valid federal orders, and acted like the problem was that the man in front of him didn't fit whatever picture he had in his head. By then, people around the gate were watching. A cargo driver in the next lane had stopped looking at his phone and started looking at them. 2 dock workers near the barrier turned fully toward the checkpoint. One clerk inside the glass booth was already glancing between Pike and the paperwork. Nobody needed to guess that this had stopped being a routine check. Cross tried one more time to keep it procedural. He told Pike again to contact the Navy Transportation Liaison listed on the orders. That was the right move. It also gave Pike another chance to fix it before he buried himself. He refused again. Then he said something worse. He questioned whether Cross really held the rank he claimed. Not whether the documents were authentic. Not whether dispatch had confirmed anything. He questioned the man himself. That was the moment the professional mask dropped. Now it was obvious this wasn't a documentation issue. Pike had decided that the person standing in front of him didn't look like somebody he was prepared to treat as a commander. Cross didn't take the bait. He didn't get loud. He didn't posture. He stated very plainly that Pike was interfering with an active-duty military movement and refusing a basic verification step. That should have made any competent officer pause. Pike did pause, but not because he suddenly understood the law. He paused because he realized people were watching, and he'd already pushed too far to back down easily. That's when ego usually gets dangerous. Once an officer like that feels an audience, he starts thinking about pride, not policy. He worries more about not looking wrong than about actually being wrong. That's exactly what happened here. Pike looked around, saw phones coming out, saw workers staring, and instead of calming the scene down, he doubled down in front of everybody. He told Cross he was being detained until he could sort it out. That statement was the whole case in one sentence. Pike still hadn't verified the orders, still hadn't called the listed military contact, still hadn't identified any actual offense. He just decided detention was the next move because he wanted control back. Cross remained where he was and made the situation clear for the record. He stated that he was a naval commander on active duty orders, that Pike had been given valid identification and paperwork, and that Pike had refused to use the listed verification channel. He was doing 2 things at once there. He was protecting himself, and he was building the timeline out loud for every camera that might later review the scene. That was smart. Very smart. Because this story was no longer living only in Pike's head or in a report he could clean up later. It was at a port gate, in public, during operating hours, with witnesses, cameras, and radio traffic already moving through the system. And Pike still didn't stop. He reached for the detention anyway. That decision was the one he was going to wear for the rest of his career, because while he was trying to prove he ran that gate, someone else had already heard enough over the radio to understand that a local officer was interfering with a Navy commander traveling under orders, and that someone was already heading toward the checkpoint. Lieutenant Elena Ward got to the gate before Pike could drag it any further. She walked into the lane, saw Cross standing outside the vehicle, saw Pike still trying to control the scene, and went straight to the point. She asked Pike what the issue was. He told her he was detaining Cross because the paperwork looked suspicious and the situation didn't make sense to him. That answer fell apart fast. Ward asked whether he had run the verification process on the orders. He said no. She asked whether he had called the military contact listed on the paperwork. Again, no. At that point, Pike had no real defense. He had already moved into detention before doing the basic job in front of him. Ward took the documents from Cross and actually read them. That was the difference. She checked the identification, the transfer orders, the access authorization, and the movement details. Everything was there. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing was missing. The contact number was printed right on the page. She called it. The call took less than a minute. Chief Warrant Officer Noah Bennett picked up and confirmed exactly what Cross had been saying the whole time. Active duty status, valid orders, scheduled arrival, authorized access. That ended the factual dispute right there. There was nothing left for Pike to figure out. He had already been wrong, and now his supervisor had it confirmed on the phone. Ward asked him why he had detained an active duty naval commander without making that call first. Pike tried to talk around it. He said the commander was being difficult. He said something felt off. He said he needed to secure the gate. None of that helped him because the facts were already set. The commander had presented valid ID, valid orders, the correct vehicle, and the correct lane, and Pike ignored the verification route that would have cleared it immediately. That's where the situation stopped being a bad judgment call and started looking like misconduct. Ward told him to release Cross right away. Pike didn't like being corrected in public. You could see that. He stalled for a moment, then stepped back and ended the detention. He still didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge that he had caused the entire problem. He just backed off because now there was another officer there with more authority. And this time it wasn't a black commander he felt comfortable dismissing. That part matters too. Cross kept it professional. He didn't make a scene. He asked for names and badge numbers. Ward gave hers immediately. Pike was slower about it. Cross noted the time, the gate location, and who was present. He was building the record while Pike was still thinking this might stay small. It wasn't going to stay small. The people nearby had already seen enough to know this wasn't a normal check. One driver had recorded part of the detention from the next lane. 2 dock workers had their phones out. The gate clerk inside the booth had watched the whole thing from a clear angle. On top of that, Pike was wearing a body cam, and the radio traffic had already gone through the system. That meant there were multiple records of what happened before anybody got a chance to rewrite it. Ward understood the problem immediately. This wasn't just one angry officer making a bad stop. This was a local port officer interfering with a federal military movement after refusing to verify active duty orders. That creates legal exposure fast. It creates command pressure fast. And once military channels get involved, people above the Port Authority start asking questions that nobody at that gate wants to answer. Cross left to continue his assignment, but he didn't let it die at the checkpoint. He reported the detention through Navy channels the same day. That pushed the issue outside local control. Now, the Port Authority wasn't just dealing with a complaint from the person Pike detained. They were dealing with federal attention, documented interference, and a timeline that looked bad from the first minute to the last. Internal Affairs got notified almost immediately. That tells you how serious it was. Most departments slow-walk complaints when they think they can bury them in paperwork. This one moved the same day because the risk was obvious. All anybody had to do was look at the order sheet, the verification number, and the detention decision. Pike had the documents, he had the process. He skipped both and went straight to control. That's what was about to ruin him. And it got worse once Internal Affairs started pulling background, because this wasn't coming into the system as a clean first incident. Pike already had prior complaints. Similar pattern, aggressive stops, poor judgment, problems with escalation. None of that had been serious enough to force action before. Now it was all coming back into the file, attached to a federal incident. That's how careers actually collapse. Not always with one moment out of nowhere. Usually with one moment that forces people to look at everything they ignored before. By the end of that day, Pike still had his badge, but the ground under him was already gone. His supervisor had verified the commander's orders herself. The witnesses had video. The Bodycam existed. The radio logs existed. The Navy complaint was in motion. Internal Affairs had the case. And once all of that starts moving together, the officer usually isn't deciding anything anymore. Internal Affairs moved on it that same day because the case was too risky to sit on. By then, this wasn't just a complaint from somebody angry at a checkpoint. This was a documented detention of an active duty naval commander traveling under valid orders, and Pike had done it after refusing the most basic verification step available to him. That's what made the whole thing dangerous for the department. The problem wasn't only what he did to cross. The problem was that he did it in a place with cameras, witnesses, radio traffic, and a supervisor who had already confirmed he was wrong. So Internal Affairs started with the easiest part, the record. They pulled Pike's body cam. They pulled the gate footage. They pulled the radio logs. They pulled Ward's report. They pulled the witness video from the driver and the dock workers. Then they built the timeline. And the timeline killed Pike. It showed Cross arriving in the correct lane, in the correct vehicle, with military ID and written orders. It showed him offering the paperwork immediately. It showed him directing Pike to the listed Navy contact for verification. It showed Pike refusing to make that call. Then it showed him escalating to detention anyway. After that, it showed Ward arriving, reading the same paperwork, making the same call Pike refused to make, and getting confirmation almost immediately. That's the kind of timeline you can't explain away. It's too simple. Pike had the documents. Pike had the number. Pike had the process. He ignored all three. Then they got into the body cam. That's where the excuses usually die, because Pike's version of events started falling apart the moment the footage was reviewed. Cross never matched the kind of behavior Pike would later try to imply in his first statement. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't evasive. He wasn't threatening. He kept saying the same thing the whole time. Active duty orders, correct access, verify the paperwork. That consistency mattered. It showed control, and it showed that Pike wasn't reacting to danger. He was reacting to not being obeyed the way he wanted. And then there was the language. Internal Affairs pays attention to wording because wording tells you what an officer was actually thinking in real time. Pike kept framing the situation around his personal suspicion, not around a policy failure or a security issue he could describe. He questioned the commander himself instead of verifying the documents in front of him. That difference matters. It's one thing to say the paperwork needs a review. It's another thing to look at a black commander with valid orders and act like the real problem is that you don't believe a man like that should be standing there in that role. That's where the racial profiling issue got stronger. Not because Pike said something cartoonishly racist. Officers like him usually aren't that stupid on camera. It came through in the choices. He ignored every fact that should have lowered the temperature. He skipped verification. He dismissed rank. He challenged identity instead of process. Then he pushed the situation into detention when he started getting watched. That pattern tells its own story. Internal Affairs also reviewed Pike's prior complaints, and now the department had a bigger problem. This incident didn't come into the system as a one-time lapse. It attached itself to older complaints that showed the same pattern: over-aggressive stops, escalation when challenged, and repeated issues involving black men. Those complaints had never forced a serious response before. Now they look different because this time, the department had clear video, a federal complaint, a supervisor who contradicted Pike in real time, and a victim with military standing and paperwork that checked out instantly. That's how an officer goes from being difficult to being a liability. Ward's report made it worse for him too, because she didn't soften it. She documented that Pike failed to verify valid active duty orders before detaining Cross. She documented that verification was completed in under a minute when she made the call. She documented that Cross was released immediately after confirmation. That report mattered because it came from Pike's own chain, not from the commander, not from a lawyer, not from a bystander. One of his own supervisors basically put in writing that this thing never should have happened. Then the Navy complaint hit. Once that came in through formal channels, the Port Authority command staff lost room to play games with it. Now they weren't just looking at discipline. They were looking at federal interference, public exposure, and institutional embarrassment. Cross had been on active duty movement. The officer at the gate ignored it, detained him, and delayed the assignment for no legitimate reason. That's the kind of case that gets attention above the local level fast. Pike still had to give a formal statement, and that interview didn't help him. He tried to frame the detention as a judgment call made for security. Internal Affairs pushed back because that answer didn't fit the evidence. Security concerns get tested through procedure. Verification is part of the job. He skipped that and went straight to control. Then he tried to justify the detention after the fact. That doesn't hold up when the video shows the person you detained literally handing you the verification route. At that point, the case was basically done. Not officially closed yet, but done. The department knew it. Internal Affairs knew it. Ward definitely knew it. Pike probably knew it too, even if he didn't want to say it out loud. Because once the evidence shows that you had the facts, had the process, ignored both, and then detained the wrong man in public, the question stops being whether you messed up. The question becomes whether the department is willing to keep wearing you. And in this case, that answer was coming fast. By the next morning, Pike was removed from gate duty. Internal Affairs had the body cam, gate footage, radio logs, Ward's report, and the Navy complaint. All of it showed the same thing. Cross gave valid ID and orders, offered verification, and Pike ignored it. Then Ward made one phone call and confirmed everything in under a minute. That ended Pike's defense. His older complaints came back up too. Similar pattern: aggressive conduct, escalation, bad judgment. This time, the department couldn't hide behind excuses because the case involved a black naval commander on active duty orders and public evidence from multiple angles. Pike was terminated. His port clearance was revoked. His case was also referred for decertification review. Cross gave a formal response after that. He kept it professional. He said the issue was bigger than one officer. The problem was poor training, poor supervision, and local officers not understanding the limits of their authority when federal military orders are in play. After that, the port changed procedure. Mandatory verification steps, new training on military access, clearer supervisor escalation rules. That's the story. Pike thought he was controlling a gate. What he actually did was hand Internal Affairs an easy case and end his own career. Cross didn't beat him with volume. He beat him with paperwork, protocol, and self-control. If you've ever seen somebody abuse a little authority and pay for it later, put it in the comments. And subscribe for more stories like this.
Who are you and who cleared you to be here?
FBI, this is a federal operation. We need to stop and verify through command.
You're inside my perimeter.
No, you're inside my scene.
Watch your mouth.
I'm giving you the cleanest way out of this.
Turn around.
You putting hands on a federal agent before clarifying everything?
Deputy Cole Mercer believed he controlled the crime scene. By the time anyone realized how far he had gone, he had already handcuffed the undercover FBI agent running the operation. Ethan Cross told him he was federal. He showed credentials. He told him the scene was part of an active investigation. Mercer ignored all of it. He treated Cross like a civilian interfering with police work. He gave orders. Cross repeated that Mercer needed to stop and verify. Mercer refused. Then he put him in cuffs. That was the first major failure. Not the handcuffs by themselves. The refusal to verify before using force. Comment where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about authority, misconduct, and real consequences, like and subscribe. This happened at an industrial storage site outside a suburban commercial strip. Federal agents had been working the location for months. The case involved stolen firearms moving through a local distribution network. The FBI had built it slowly. Surveillance, informants, controlled contacts, scheduled movement. The plan that night was simple. Federal agents handled the operation. Local deputies secured the outside perimeter and stayed in their lane. Mercer did not stay in his lane. He arrived with a county unit assigned to perimeter support. Within minutes, he started acting like scene command belonged to him. He repositioned deputies without asking. He challenged people he did not recognize. He made the kind of fast, confident decisions that looked decisive until they turned out to be wrong. Cross was near the loading zone when Mercer focused on him. Plain clothes, work boots, dark jacket. That was intentional. Cross had been inside the operation long enough that he could not look like law enforcement. He was not standing around. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, monitoring a transfer point tied to the case. Mercer saw a man he did not know and decided that was enough. He walked over and started questioning him in a hard tone. "Who are you? What are you doing here? Who cleared you to be on this side of the perimeter?" Cross answered in the shortest way possible. He identified himself as FBI. He told Mercer this was a federal operation. He told him to get a supervisor and verify. Mercer did not do that. He demanded credentials. Cross produced them carefully and directly. Mercer looked at them and rejected them without checking anything. No radio verification. No supervisor. No contact with the federal command post. That changed the situation. Up to that point, Mercer could still claim he was sorting out confusion at a busy scene. Once he had credentials in front of him and refused to verify, it became a choice. Cross kept his voice level. He did not argue. He did not posture. He told Mercer again that he was interfering with an active federal investigation. Mercer responded by raising his voice and tightening control. He started framing Cross as non-compliant. That matters because officers often build the justification for force with language before they use it. Once Mercer described Cross as refusing commands, he gave himself cover for the next step. Cross still did not give him what he wanted. No sudden movement, no shouting, no resistance. Mercer ordered him to turn around. Cross knew exactly what was happening. He also knew fighting with a county deputy in the middle of a live operation would make the scene worse. So he complied. Mercer grabbed his arm, turned him, and cuffed him. Other deputies noticed it immediately. Not because they knew who Cross was, but because the interaction made no sense. They had just watched a plainclothes man present federal credentials and get handcuffed anyway. A few of them slowed down and looked over. Nobody stepped in yet. That usually happens when a bad decision is made quickly by someone acting certain. People hesitate. They assume maybe he knows something they do not. Mercer kept talking after the cuffs were on. He said Cross had failed to follow commands. He said nobody moved through his perimeter without clearance. He said he was securing the scene. He was not securing the scene. He was creating liability. Cross said very little after that. He did not need to. Mercer was making the record himself, and there was a record. Mercer's body camera was running. Other deputies had cameras on too. Federal surveillance teams were also active nearby because the operation had already been underway before Mercer arrived. This was not a case where facts would depend on memory later. The sequence was captured. That mattered because Mercer was still acting like this would end with his version of events controlling the report. It would not. One deputy finally asked Mercer quietly whether anyone had verified the credentials. Mercer brushed him off, said he was handling it, said the man was obstructing, said federal or not, nobody was above his authority on that scene. That line said everything about how he was thinking. He believed presence gave him control. He believed volume could replace procedure. He believed local authority could override a situation he did not understand. He was wrong on every point. Cross remained in cuffs near the loading area while the operation stalled around him. That is another part people miss in stories like this. One officer's ego does not just create a personal conflict. It disrupts the work. It puts cases at risk. It forces everyone else to stop managing the actual threat and start dealing with him. And command had not even arrived yet. That was coming next. And once federal supervisors stepped onto that scene, Mercer was going to lose control of it completely. Mercer's first problem was not the FBI. It was his own sergeant. Daniel Navarro came in from the south side of the perimeter after hearing Mercer on the radio and saw Ethan Cross in cuffs near the loading area. He looked at Mercer, then at Cross, then at the badge wallet in Mercer's hand. He asked whether identity had been verified. Mercer said the man had claimed to be federal, but was interfering and refusing direction. Navarro asked again, verified or not. Mercer had no clean answer. That told Navarro enough. Cross gave his name. Calmly. Ethan Cross, FBI. Lead case agent. Active operation. Mercer already had that information. He had chosen not to use it. Navarro told Mercer to uncuff him. Mercer didn't do it. He started explaining himself and said, scene security, officer safety, unknown plainclothes male inside a restricted area. He kept talking like the more words he used, the stronger it would sound. It didn't. Before Navarro could force the issue, federal vehicles came through the secured lane, 3 SUVs, fast stop, doors open, agents out. Vanessa Reed was first, special agent in charge. She moved straight toward Cross. She saw the cuffs immediately. Then she looked at Mercer, then at Navarro. She asked who detained her agent. Mercer answered before Navarro could. He said Cross had refused commands and obstructed the perimeter. Reed asked whether credentials had been presented. Cross said yes. Navarro said yes. One of the other deputies said yes. That ended Mercer's argument right there. Reed asked why a deputy assigned to outer perimeter support had handcuffed the undercover FBI agent running the case after seeing credentials. Mercer tried to shift again. Said nobody had informed him who Cross was. Said Cross did not identify himself clearly enough. Said he had to make a quick decision. Bad answer. Cross had identified himself. Mercer had seen credentials. The quick decision was the problem. Navarro stepped in and removed the cuffs himself. Cross brought his hands forward and rubbed his wrists once. That was it. No speech, no yelling. He was already back on the job. He told Reed the local perimeter had been disrupted. His detention had interrupted federal movement, and Mercer had ignored repeated instructions to verify through command. That was the version that mattered. Short, precise, hard to challenge. Mercer still tried. He said Cross had challenged his authority. That line hurt him more than anything else he had said so far. It showed exactly what this had been about. Not confusion, authority. Reed asked him who gave him scene command. Mercer had no answer, because there wasn't one. County units were there to support the perimeter. That had already been briefed. Mercer had taken more than that on his own. Navarro told Mercer to step back and stop talking. He did not argue with that order. He just stood there looking like he was trying to work out whether there was still a way to recover it. There wasn't. By then, several deputies had already seen enough to know this was going nowhere good. They were not focused on the warehouse anymore. They were watching Mercer, watching Navarro, watching the federal side lock the sequence down in real time. And everything was being captured. Mercer's Bodycam was on. So were the other deputies' cameras. Federal teams had their own recordings. The warehouse had already been under observation before local units arrived. This was not a memory fight waiting to happen later. The record existed already. Navarro requested county command to the scene. He also told dispatch to flag all camera footage for retention. That is not something supervisors do over a routine disagreement. He knew this was heading straight to internal affairs. Reed kept the focus where it belonged. She asked Cross one question. Could the operation continue? Cross said yes, but not cleanly. Timing had been affected. Perimeter attention had shifted. One transfer window was already gone. That mattered. Mercer had not just embarrassed himself. He had interfered with a live investigation. Navarro pulled Mercer aside and asked him directly why he had not verified the badge. Mercer said he did not like how Cross spoke to him. That answer was even worse than the first one. It meant he had made an enforcement decision based on tone, not facts. Navarro asked if Mercer understood that he had detained a federal agent without verification, without probable cause, and while assigned to a support role, he had already exceeded. Mercer did not answer that either. He started saying he had been trying to maintain control. Navarro cut him off. It was never his scene to control. That was the end of Mercer as an active officer on that scene. A county lieutenant arrived minutes later. He got a short briefing from Navarro and Reed. Both versions matched on the important points. Credentials shown, verification refused, federal agent detained, operation interrupted. The lieutenant did not spend time debating language. He took Mercer off scene duty immediately. He ordered another deputy to replace him at the perimeter. He told Mercer not to discuss the incident except through formal review. Mercer handed over his camera unit and stepped away. That was the first official sign that the department was separating itself from him. Cross went back to work because the case still existed, whether Mercer had damaged it or not. Reed moved agents back into position and adjusted the plan. Some of the original timing was gone. One contact point had already collapsed. They salvaged what they could. Mercer stood off to the side with no role left. That's what officers like him never expect. They think the bad part is getting corrected in front of people. It's not. The bad part is when everyone around them keeps working and they realize they've become the incident. Before the scene was fully closed, internal affairs had already been notified. County Command requested all radio traffic, body camera footage, and scene logs. Federal Legal Counsel was looped in before midnight. Mercer was told he was being placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Same night, no delay. That's when it finally landed. He hadn't just made a bad call. He had made a record the department could not defend. Mercer wrote the report like he still had control. He didn't. By the next morning, Internal Affairs had the Bodycam. County Command had the radio traffic. The FBI had already documented the disruption to the operation. Mercer's report said Cross was obstructive. The video showed Cross identifying himself, showing credentials, and telling Mercer to verify through command. Mercer's report said the detention was necessary for scene security. He was perimeter support. It was never his scene to run. That ended the argument before the hearing even started. He was pulled from duty. Badge turned in. Weapon turned in. Access cut off. Cross spent that same morning documenting what Mercer had damaged. The interruption had cost time. It had shifted attention away from the target area. It had disrupted the operation at a critical point. He kept the report narrow and factual. That made it worse for Mercer, not better. Internal Affairs interviewed the deputies who were there. Their statements matched the footage. Cross identified himself. Credentials were shown. Mercer refused to verify. Navarro told him to fix it. He kept going. That matters. A rushed mistake is one thing. Refusing to stop after multiple chances is something else. Then Command looked at Mercer's file. Old complaints, prior warnings, notes about scene behavior and authority issues. Nothing that had ended his career before. Now it all sat next to a body cam video that was impossible to defend. The FBI filed a formal complaint. Straight facts, no drama. That carried weight fast. A county deputy had interfered with a federal operation after being shown credentials by the lead agent. The sheriff's office tried the standard public response first. Brief statement, active review, no further comment. That lasted until the story got out. Once local media learned that a deputy had handcuffed the undercover FBI agent running the case, the department lost control of the narrative. The public did not need a long explanation. The facts were enough. Mercer went into the disciplinary hearing with one defense. He said he acted under pressure in a fast-moving scene. That did not hold. The video showed the sequence clearly. Cross identified himself. Mercer saw credentials. Mercer chose not to verify. Mercer escalated anyway. That is not pressure. That is a decision. The findings came back quickly. Violations on detention procedure, interagency protocol, chain of command, false reporting. He was terminated. That was the official result. The bigger result came after. Federal trust in the county side took a hit. Joint operation procedures were reviewed. Briefing rules were tightened. Supervisors had to answer a basic question they should never have had to answer in the first place. Why did a perimeter deputy think he could overrun a federal scene and handcuff the lead agent? That became the training issue. Not just Mercer, the system around him. Cross finished his reporting and moved on. He did not need to keep talking. The incident already said enough. Mercer had several chances to stop before it reached termination. When Cross identified himself, when the badge came out, when Navarro asked if identity had been verified, he ignored each one. That is why he lost the job. If you've seen officers treat protocol like an obstacle instead of a rule, put it in the comments. Share the story with someone who thinks authority excuses bad judgment. And subscribe for more stories like this.
You need to step away from the vehicle.
I'm authorized to be here,
That's not what I asked.
and I just answered the part that matters.
Why are you in this area?
Because I am permitted to be in this area.
You're being evasive.
No. I'm being
Step away
precise.
from the car.
On what basis?
Because
That is
I
not
told
a
you
basis.
to.
What happens when a police captain decides to test his authority in the one place where procedure matters most? This story started in a restricted federal courthouse parking area. A precinct captain saw a man by a parked vehicle, assumed he didn't belong there, and turned a simple verification into a public confrontation. What he failed to process, even after being told directly, was that the man was a federal judge. By the time courthouse security stepped in, the damage was already done, and the cameras had all of it. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you like stories about people getting exposed when they abuse authority, like the video and subscribe. Captain Victor Hale walked into the situation like he had already made up his mind. Judge Adrian Holloway was standing beside his car in a reserved courthouse zone for judges and cleared personnel. The vehicle permit was displayed properly. Access to the area was controlled. This wasn't some open public lot where people wandered in by mistake. Hale approached and challenged him right away. Not with a basic question. More like he was confronting someone he believed he had caught. Holloway answered in a calm, controlled way. He identified himself and explained that he was authorized to be there. Hale didn't leave it there. He asked for more identification and kept pressing. His tone got sharper. He started treating the exchange like an investigation instead of a quick check. Officer Marisol Vega was close enough to follow every word. She could already see the problem. Hale was escalating before confirming anything. Holloway gave him the easy solution. He said courthouse security could verify his access immediately. Hale ignored that and kept pushing his own version of the situation. He questioned why Holloway was in the area. He spoke to him like he was making excuses instead of giving an answer. That got attention. A few courthouse employees near the entrance slowed down and looked over. In a federal building, people notice fast when a routine interaction stops looking routine. Hale then told Holloway to step away from the vehicle. Holloway stayed where he was. He didn't get loud. He didn't argue. He just repeated that he was authorized to be there and that Hale could confirm it through security. That should have forced Hale to stop and check. Instead, he treated the refusal to move as defiance. That was the real shift. At that point, Hale wasn't trying to understand the situation. He was trying to win it. He started framing Holloway as uncooperative. He spoke like his command alone settled the issue. Vega looked toward the building entrance. She knew security could clear it up in seconds. Hale still hadn't asked. Holloway stayed measured. That only made Hale look worse. Every calm answer made the captain's behavior harder to justify. Then Hale said something that changed the whole encounter. He made it clear he believed his authority on that scene outweighed whatever Holloway was claiming. That wasn't a misunderstanding anymore, that was ego. Inside the courthouse, Security Supervisor Thomas Greer had already been alerted that there was a problem in the restricted parking area. He was on his way out. Thomas Greer, the courthouse security supervisor, came out after getting word that there was a problem in the restricted parking area. He saw the situation right away. Captain Victor Hale was pressing the encounter. Judge Adrian Holloway was standing by his vehicle, calm and steady. Officer Marisol Vega was nearby, watching and saying nothing. Greer asked what the issue was. Hale answered first. He said he was dealing with a person in a restricted area and was trying to confirm authorization. That sounded reasonable on paper. It didn't match what had already happened. Holloway identified himself again. Same answer as before. He said he was a federal judge and that his access could be confirmed through courthouse records. Greer recognized him immediately. He confirmed Holloway's identity on the spot. He also confirmed that Holloway was authorized to park there. That should have closed the matter. Hale didn't let it go cleanly. Instead of ending the interaction, he tried to defend how he handled it. He said he was following procedure and checking a restricted space. The problem was obvious. A simple verification would have resolved it at the start. Hale had skipped that and gone straight into confrontation. Greer made it clear there was no parking violation and no access issue. Holloway belonged there. The matter was settled. Holloway didn't add drama. He didn't argue. He let the facts stand on their own. Vega stayed quiet, but by then, the whole scene had turned against Hale. Security had confirmed the judge. Witnesses had seen the exchange. The body camera was still running. Hale backed off, but not in a professional way. He didn't acknowledge the mistake. He didn't apologize. He just stepped away and acted like the encounter was finished. It wasn't. What happened in that parking zone was already on video from more than one angle. Courthouse security had its own coverage. Hale's body camera had the audio and his conduct. People nearby had watched enough to remember exactly how it unfolded. Greer escorted Holloway inside without making it bigger than it already was. Hale left the area believing he had avoided a serious problem. He hadn't. By the end of that day, the footage had already been requested for review. Captain Victor Hale left the courthouse thinking the incident would stay small. He was wrong. Federal courthouses don't handle problems like a neighborhood complaint. Everything is documented. Access points are monitored. Security reports get logged. When a local police captain challenges a federal judge in a restricted area and keeps pushing after being told who he's dealing with, that doesn't disappear. By the end of the day, the encounter had already reached courthouse administration. Security Supervisor Thomas Greer filed his report first. He kept it factual. Time of incident, location, who was present, what was said, when verification happened, when the matter should have ended. That report mattered because it came from the person responsible for access control. He was the one who could say, clearly and without guesswork, that Judge Adrian Holloway had valid authorization the whole time. Then the camera review started. Courthouse security footage showed Hale approaching fast and setting the tone immediately. It showed Holloway staying by his vehicle and not making any threatening movement. It showed Greer arriving and resolving the issue within moments. Hale's body camera made it worse. The audio confirmed that Holloway identified himself early. It confirmed that security verification was available from the start. It also confirmed that Hale kept pressing instead of checking first. That was the problem in simple terms. He had options. He ignored them. Internal Affairs got the referral the next morning. Investigator Naomi Kerr took the case. She wasn't interested in excuses or polished summaries. She started with the footage, then compared it to written reports, then pulled Hale's history. That's where the situation got more serious. The courthouse encounter by itself was already bad. A precinct captain had escalated a routine contact in a restricted federal zone, dismissed clear identification, and acted like his authority solved everything. That alone could trigger discipline. But Kerr found this wasn't isolated. There had been prior complaints, not identical, but close enough to matter. Incidents where Hale had turned routine interactions into control contests. Cases where people said he got confrontational when challenged, especially when someone calmly told him he was wrong. Most of those complaints had gone nowhere, a warning here, a notation there. Nothing that actually stopped the pattern. Now the department had clean video. That changes everything. Hale submitted his own report. He tried to frame the encounter as a standard security check in a sensitive area. He described Holloway as resistant and said he was trying to maintain control until identity could be confirmed. The footage undercut that version line by line. Kerr noted the gaps immediately. Hale had claimed caution. The video showed escalation. He had claimed uncertainty. The video showed that verification was available and ignored. He had claimed procedural concern. The video showed that once security confirmed the judge, he still tried to justify himself instead of acknowledging the mistake. Officer Marisol Vega was interviewed next. She answered carefully, but she didn't protect Hale. She confirmed that Holloway identified himself early. She confirmed that security could have verified access right away. She also confirmed that the tone of the encounter became more aggressive as Holloway stayed calm. That statement hurt Hale more than the footage in some ways. Video shows conduct. A second officer confirms judgment. Now it was no longer one person's interpretation. It was a documented pattern in one incident. Within days, Hale was pulled from active command duties, pending the outcome of the investigation. That got attention inside the department fast. A captain doesn't get sidelined over nothing. Word spread, first through supervisors, then patrol units, then courthouse personnel who had already heard about the parking lot incident. And once people knew there was footage, the tone changed. Nobody wanted to defend something that was already on camera. Judge Holloway didn't go public. That mattered too. He didn't hold a press conference, didn't make speeches. He let the record develop on its own. By the end of the first week, Internal Affairs had enough to move past simple review. The case was now about misconduct, failure to follow procedure, and possible dishonesty in reporting. And that's when Victor Hale finally understood the real problem. This was no longer about one bad interaction in a parking area. It was about whether he could still hold rank at all. Once Internal Affairs lined up the footage with the written reports, Victor Hale's position got weak fast. The case against him wasn't complicated. He challenged a man in a restricted federal parking zone, ignored a direct identification, passed on the easiest way to verify it, and kept pressing after courthouse security confirmed the truth. Then he filed a report that made his own conduct sound more reasonable than it was. That's the kind of thing departments can work around once. Maybe twice. Not when there's clean video. Investigator Naomi Kerr finished the review with 4 core findings. Hale escalated without need. He failed to verify available information. He mishandled the encounter after the judge identified himself. And his written account didn't match what the cameras showed. That last part did the real damage. A captain can survive a bad judgment call. It gets much harder when supervisors stop trusting what he puts in writing. The department suspended him first. That bought time for command staff to review the file and decide how far to take it. By then, the answer was obvious. Too many people had seen the footage. Too many people knew exactly what happened. He was terminated, not transferred, not reassigned, finished. Inside the department, the case spread quickly. Nobody needed an official memo to understand what it meant. The story moved through patrol units, supervisors, courthouse contacts, and command staff because everyone could see the same thing. This whole mess started because a captain wanted control more than he wanted facts. Marisol Vega came out of it differently. Her conduct was reviewed, but she wasn't tied to the escalation. She hadn't driven the encounter, and she didn't try to cover it afterward. Her statement matched the video, and that mattered. Judge Adrian Holloway kept his response measured the whole way through. He didn't go looking for cameras. He didn't turn it into a public campaign. He let the record speak for itself. That made the result harder to dispute. Courthouse security also changed procedure after the incident. Local officers dealing with anyone in restricted judicial parking had to confirm status through security before pushing an enforcement contact any further. Basic rule, simple fix. It should have already been standard. Hale did try to defend himself. He said he was acting within his authority. He said he was protecting a secure area. He said he was making a judgment call in real time. That argument collapsed on review, because none of this came down to a close call. He had a clear path to verify the situation, and he chose confrontation instead. That ended his career, and honestly, it should have. This wasn't about confusion, it wasn't about pressure. It was about ego taking over in a place where procedure exists for a reason. So that's the story. A routine check turned into a career-ending mistake because one captain decided being challenged was worse than being wrong. What would you have done in that situation? Put it in the comments. And subscribe for more stories where the footage, the reports, and the facts all catch up with the person who thought they were untouchable.
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
For what?
You're being detained.
On what legal basis?
Suspicious behavior. Ongoing investigation.
That doesn't mean anything by itself.
I'm not taking your word for anything.
What happens when a detective gets so locked into his own authority that he stops checking whether he even has legal ground to stand on? That was the shape of it. A public detention. Broad daylight. Parking lot traffic moving past like nothing unusual was happening. Detective Nolan Pierce had one hand on Adrian Cross's shoulder and the other near his cuffs, and he was treating a routine identity check like a personal challenge. Adrian stayed controlled. He kept telling Pierce there was a clean way to verify who he was. Pierce didn't want verification yet. He wanted compliance first. And that was the first real problem. Before this goes any further, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about bad stops, rights, and officers wrecking their own careers because they couldn't slow down for 10 seconds, hit like and subscribe. This one got worse because the detective had multiple chances to fix it and kept passing on every one of them. Adrian Cross wasn't some loud guy trying to bluff his way out of a stop. He was 39, federal, experienced, and deep enough into undercover work to know that random street-level ego could do serious damage. He worked on a long-running task force that involved narcotics movement, shell businesses, and a couple of people who still didn't know the government was already inside their circle. His job depended on staying boring in public. No speeches, no drama, no flashing credentials unless he had to. That afternoon, he just finished a controlled meet near a strip plaza off the highway. The location made sense for the kind of people he was tracking. Busy enough to blend in. Ordinary enough to disappear. Gas station on one side, cell phone shop, check cashing place, a sandwich spot. Cars coming and going. Nobody paying attention unless something forced them to. Pierce was nearby on a local narcotics detail with 2 other officers. He'd been on the department a long time, long enough to build a reputation for being aggressive and short on patience. Some people inside the unit called that proactive. Others called it exactly what it was. Sloppy when his instincts took over. He liked stops where he controlled the tone from the first second. He liked being the one people had to answer to. He did not like being corrected. He noticed Adrian because Adrian fit a pattern only if someone already wanted to see one. A man sitting in a parked SUV for a few minutes, looking at his phone once, scanning the lot, then pulling out slowly after another vehicle left. Normal undercover behavior. Also, normal civilian behavior. Depends on whether you start with facts or start with suspicion and build backward from there. Pierce started backward. He pulled in behind Adrian as Adrian turned out of the lot and headed towards the frontage road. No traffic violation, no reckless move, no equipment issue, nothing clean. That mattered later. Right then, Pierce told dispatch he was making contact with a suspicious vehicle tied to possible narcotics activity in the area. Even there, he patted the ground under his own feet. Not a confirmed offense. Not probable cause. Just enough vague language to get moving. Adrian noticed him fast. That came with the job. He saw the unmarked unit, saw the angle, saw the way Pierce closed space, and knew this wasn't random. He also knew something else. A bad local stop could force him into a corner. Reveal too much and he could damage the operation. Reveal too little, and some detective with a badge problem could escalate the whole thing because he took caution as disrespect. Pierce lit him up near the edge of the gas station entrance. Adrian pulled over clean, engine off. Hands visible. Nothing sudden. He'd done this from the other side of the badge. He knew what a reasonable officer should see. A calm driver, no threat display, no weird movement, no sign of danger. What Pierce saw instead was resistance waiting to happen. Guys like him often did that. They treated calm people as suspicious when the calm person didn't seem impressed enough. Pierce approached hard, fast steps, shoulders squared, hand too close to his belt for a stop this thin. His body camera was on. The gas station cameras were on. 2 people near the ice freezer had already started watching. That part matters because officers like Pierce usually think pressure works best in the first 30 seconds. They want to set the tone before anyone else can evaluate what they're doing. He demanded identification and started asking Adrian where he was coming from, what he was doing in the lot, who he had met with, and why he had been sitting there. Adrian answered carefully. He said enough to signal that Pierce needed to slow down and verify through the proper channel. He identified himself as law enforcement in limited terms. He told Pierce there was a supervisor route for confirmation. He did not start spilling operational details in a public parking lot because he wasn't stupid. That should have changed the whole stop. It didn't. Pierce looked at the credential wallet Adrian had partially presented and decided almost instantly that he didn't trust it. Not because he had checked it and found a problem, because Adrian had not handed over his entire world on demand. Huge difference. A professional officer hears limited federal identification and either calls it in, asks for a supervisor, or freezes the stop long enough to avoid making a career-ending mistake. Pierce did none of that. He pressed harder. He told Adrian to step out. Adrian complied. That part stayed consistent through the whole encounter. He wasn't trying to win a roadside argument. He was trying to keep the damage contained. Once outside the vehicle, he repeated that Pierce needed to verify him through supervision before this went any further. He also told Pierce in a controlled way that the detective did not have probable cause to turn this into a detention. That hit Pierce the wrong way. Some officers can hear legal language and stay professional. Others hear it and think somebody is challenging the badge itself. Pierce was the second type. The stop stopped being investigative and started becoming personal. You could see it in how he repositioned. You could hear it in how short his responses got. He wasn't working toward clarity anymore. He was working toward submission. One of the other officers on scene, Officer Leah Mendez, started catching the shift. She wasn't in charge, but she wasn't blind either. She asked Pierce quietly whether dispatch had run the credentials path Adrian was offering. Pierce brushed it off. Said he was handling it. Said people claimed all kinds of things when they got cornered. Bad answer. Worse sign. Adrian stayed disciplined. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to educate Pierce line by line. He just kept giving him exits. Verify through a supervisor. Make the call. Use the route available. Pierce ignored everyone. That's what made this ugly, not confusion, not split-second chaos, choice. By then, people at the gas station had phones out. One guy by the pump started recording openly. A woman near the mini-mart entrance did the same. Pierce noticed. It didn't calm him down. It boxed him in. Officers with fragile judgment hate looking unsure in public. Once that happens, some of them double down because backing off feels worse to them than being wrong. Pierce told Adrian to place his hands behind his back. Adrian asked what legal basis Pierce had for that detention. Not loud, not dramatic, just direct. Pierce gave him nothing solid. Suspicious behavior, ongoing investigation, non-compliance. The usual stack of weak phrases officers reach for when they're trying to make authority sound like probable cause. Adrian still didn't resist. He turned. He placed his hands behind his back. He let Pierce make the mistake in full view of the cameras. The cuffs went on in that gas station entrance with traffic rolling by and two local officers standing there knowing the stop had already gone too far. And once Pierce crossed that line, this stopped being a bad field contact and started becoming an internal affairs case with federal attention attached to it. Pierce had already crossed the line by putting Adrian in cuffs. From there, the stop became something else. He wasn't checking facts anymore. He was trying to justify a detention he had already made. He told dispatch he had a non-compliant subject claiming to be law enforcement and possibly tied to narcotics activity. It sounded clean over the radio. It didn't match the scene. Adrian had stayed calm the whole time. No resistance, no sudden movement, no threats. He had only repeated that there was a proper way to verify his identity. Pierce searched Adrian's pockets and went through his wallet. Federal identification was right there. That should have slowed everything down. A careful detective would have stopped, called a supervisor, and verified before going any further. Pierce kept pushing. He questioned Adrian like the problem was disrespect, not procedure. Adrian stayed tight with his answers because he was undercover and wasn't going to start exposing an active federal operation in a public parking lot just to satisfy a detective's ego. By that point, people at the gas station were already recording. Pierce saw the phones. Instead of backing off, he escalated. He told Officer Leah Mendez to check Adrian's vehicle. She paused and asked the obvious question. Did they have consent or probable cause? No. Adrian clearly said he did not consent to any search. He also warned that the vehicle could contain sensitive law enforcement material. That should have ended the idea right there. Pierce opened the vehicle anyway. Officer Mendez knew the stop had gone bad. She told Pierce he needed a supervisor. He shot back that he had control of the scene. He didn't. He had a handcuffed federal agent, weak justification, witnesses filming, and two officers starting to realize this was getting dangerous for everyone standing there. Adrian still didn't lose control. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight. He let Pierce keep burying himself on camera. Only then did Pierce call for a supervisor, not because he respected the rules, because he could feel the scene slipping. Sergeant Marisol Vega was on the way, and once she arrived, Pierce was going to lose the room fast. Sergeant Marisol Vega didn't need long to see the stop was off. She pulled in, got out, and started with the basics. Why was Adrian detained? What crime were they working with? What had he done before Pierce put him in cuffs? Pierce gave her the same loose answer he had been using the whole time. Suspicious behavior. Claimed law enforcement status. Possible narcotics link. That didn't hold up. Vega looked at Adrian. Calm, controlled, no resistance. Then she looked at the officers around Pierce. Mendez wasn't backing him. Boone looked unsure. That told her plenty before she even checked the rest. She asked Adrian what he had already told Pierce. Adrian repeated it the same way he had from the start. He identified himself in limited terms, explained that there was a proper verification route, and made clear that Pierce had ignored it. He also stated that the detention had no lawful basis, and that the vehicle should not have been touched without consent or cause. Vega turned back to Pierce and asked the question that should have been asked at the beginning. Had he verified the credentials through a supervisor or federal contact? No, he had not. That was bad enough. It got worse when Vega learned he had already gone through Adrian's wallet and opened the vehicle. At that point, the scene stopped looking like a tough street stop and started looking like exactly what it was. A detective forcing a bad decision further than he could defend. Vega didn't waste time. She took the identification herself, stepped aside, and made the call. Not dramatic, not loud, just a supervisor doing the job Pierce should have let happen earlier. A few minutes later, the answer came back clean. Adrian Cross was exactly who he said he was. Active federal, valid credentials, sensitive assignment. Local officers were not getting further details on the roadside. That should have ended Pierce right there. He still tried to protect himself. He started reframing the stop. Said Adrian had been evasive, said the scene felt wrong. Said he was being cautious. Same problem again. None of that creates probable cause. None of that justifies cuffing somebody and pushing into a vehicle after federal identification had already been presented. Vega didn't let him talk his way out of it. She ordered the cuffs removed. Pierce had to do it himself. That part matters. He had put Adrian in cuffs in front of civilians, junior officers, and cameras. Now he had to unlock them under supervision after verification proved Adrian had been telling the truth the entire time. No clean exit from that. Adrian brought his hands forward, rubbed his wrists once, and stayed composed. He didn't give Pierce a speech. He didn't act relieved. He acted like a man who had watched a preventable mistake become a department problem. Vega returned Adrian's property and told the other officers to step back from the vehicle. Then she started controlling the damage. She asked Mendez for a clean timeline. She asked Boone what he had heard Adrian say. She told dispatch to preserve radio traffic connected to the stop. She also told Pierce to stop talking unless she asked him something directly. That was another bad sign for him. Supervisors don't lock an officer down on scene unless they already know the report is going to matter later. The people recording nearby were still there. A few had moved closer. Adrian noticed that, too. So did Vega. Public scene. Gas station cameras. Body cams. Dispatch logs. Civilian video. Pierce had built the worst possible setup for himself. Too many angles. Too many witnesses. Too little legal ground. Adrian then gave Vega what he had been trying to give Pierce from the start, a simple path. She could contact his federal supervisor through the proper channel and get what local command needed to know. Nothing more. That call happened. The response was controlled but direct. Adrian was operating under federal authority. The detention had interfered with sensitive work. Further contact would go through command. That changed the air around the stop fast. Pierce finally understood what he had done. He hadn't just overreached on a weak stop. He had detained an undercover federal agent, ignored available verification, opened the door to a constitutional complaint, and possibly disrupted an active operation because he couldn't stand not being in charge. And that was only the roadside part. The real damage was about to start when reports had to be written. What buried Nolan Pierce wasn't the stop alone. It was the paper trail after it. Back at the department, the story had to be written down. That's where bad stops usually get exposed. Not because officers suddenly get honest, but because reports, body cam, dispatch audio, and witness video don't line up the way they're supposed to. Pierce wrote it like he was still trying to save the stop. He described Adrian as evasive. He suggested there was possible criminal activity tied to the area. He leaned on vague language instead of facts, because facts were the problem. The footage didn't show a threatening suspect. It showed a calm man giving him repeated chances to verify his identity the right way. The internal affairs got involved fast. That wasn't optional anymore. A detective had detained an undercover federal agent without probable cause, ignored a verification path, pushed into the man's vehicle after federal identification had already been presented, and done it all in public. The federal side filed a formal complaint. Command staff pulled every piece of evidence connected to the stop. Lieutenant Dana Mercer handled the review. She rebuilt the whole thing step by step. Body cam from Pierce, body cam from Mendez, radio traffic, dispatch timestamps, gas station footage, civilian recordings, then the written reports. Piece by piece, the same pattern kept showing up. Adrian had stayed controlled. Pierce had escalated. Verification was available early. Pierce chose not to use it. The legal basis never got stronger. It got weaker the longer he kept going. That part destroyed him. A lot of officers survive one bad judgment call if they admit it early and the damage stays limited. Pierce didn't do that. He doubled down at the scene, then tried to frame the facts around his ego afterward. Internal Affairs notices that quickly. Supervisors do too. Once credibility breaks, everything attached to that officer starts shaking. The federal complaint made it worse. Adrian's supervisor confirmed that the detention had interfered with a sensitive operation. Local command didn't get every detail, but they got enough to understand the scale of the problem. Pierce hadn't just violated policy, he had created exposure for the city, damaged trust with federal partners, and risked compromising work he wasn't even cleared to know about. He was pulled from duty almost immediately. Then came the rest. Administrative review, use of authority findings, detention review, search review, report integrity review. His past cases started getting looked at too, because once an officer is caught forcing facts into a report, defense attorneys start asking what else he'd been before this one. The department terminated him. That part was inevitable by then. Not because he made one mistake under pressure, because he had chances to stop and chose not to. He ignored procedure. He ignored another officer's warning. He ignored a supervisor route. He ignored the limits of his authority. Then he tried to cover weak judgment with official language. Adrian didn't need to put on a show after that. He returned to work, finished the required reports, and let the process do what Pierce never expected it to do. Hold him accountable. No grand speech. No public victory lap. Just a clean record of what happened, and enough evidence to make sure nobody could bury it as a misunderstanding. That's what makes this kind of story worth paying attention to. The damage didn't start with handcuffs. It started the second Pierce decided being challenged felt worse than being wrong. After that, every step got more expensive. For him, for the department, and for the people who had to explain why a detective thought his ego counted as legal cause. That's the real lesson here. Authority has limits. Good officers know that. Bad ones learn it late, usually on camera, usually after they've already gone too far. What would you have done in Adrian's position? And do you think Pierce should have been fired?